talk about growth. All living things grow, like we discussed earlier, and the basis of growth lies in the cell. For the living organism to grow, the individual cells have to grow. Now, what is the basis of cell growth? There are three major bases of cell growth. There is cell division, there is cell enlargement, and there is cell differentiation. Quickly, we'll be talking about cell division. Cell division is a process known as mitosis, where the cell is divided into two identical cells. Now, take note of the word identical. What happens is that the cell reproduces itself. It reproduces itself, and the daughter cells look like the parent cells, and we call that diploid division of cells. Another thing about mitosis is that there is no alternation of genetic material. Now, after mitosis, the new cells, or what we call the nascent cells, go to the next process, which is known as cell enlargement. Like we discussed, the cell has just been divided, so they are basically half the original size. So in cell enlargement, the cells grow to their original sizes before division. And finally, in cell differentiation, the cell adapts to the particular function it is meant to fulfill. For instance, the cell of the eyes, after they must have grown and after they must have divided and grown, has to be adapted to take in light and to produce vision. The cells of the liver also have to do that same thing, and this is controlled by some processes, especially from the brain and the hormonal system. Now, there are different aspects of growth. There are different ways to measure growth. One of them is increase in dry weight. Now, increase in dry weight is basically talking about how much of the material has been added to it. But however, we can't really measure increase in dry weight without killing the living organism, because what they say, water is life. If you take out all the water, the living organism will most likely die. It's a process known as plasmolysis, as we discussed earlier. A better way of finding out cell growth, of measuring cell growth, is checking the irreversible increase in size. As a human being, sometimes you eat and you are overweight. That doesn't mean you've grown. It just means you have more material within you. Now, how much of vital materials have you gotten? How much more cells have you gotten? That is another way of discovering how much you have grown. And the third one is an increase in the number of cells. If you can discover how many cells have been added, you can know how much that has grown. For instance, if you look at yeast cells multiply very fast. So you can measure how far it has grown by measuring how many cells has been added. And like I've said, cell is the basis of growth. So how much more cells you get will tell you how much the living organism has grown. Furthermore, we'll be moving to growth in plants. Like we discussed when we talked about the properties of living organisms, plant growth occurs continuously, but in two major parts. While for animal, growth is uniform, growth is universal, but in plant it is only in the two major areas. Now, the two major areas are the shoots and the roots. The shoots consist of the leaves, the flowers, and what have you, while the root is basically what is underneath the ground. Now, how far these areas grow will tell how much of growth occurs. That's not to say that the stem does not grow. However, growth is very minimal in the stem. And there are some factors that determine how much of growth occurs. One of them is growth hormones. Especially in higher organisms, growth hormones have a lot of roles to play in controlling how much growth occurs. For instance, in plants, we have some hormones known as like the auxins and the cytokinins. These hormones help to grow what we know as the plant meristem, the shoots, and the root. In human beings, we have what is known as the pituitary hormone, which helps to control how much growth occurs and in what part of the body that growth occurs. Now, one of the reasons why cell growth has to occur is to replace worn out cells. Like we said, cells die. Cells that died have to be replaced. And one of the ways that this happens is through cell division, as we discussed earlier. Another reason is the living organism has to grow itself. The living organism has to mature. So cell growth is necessary for maturation. And with that, we've come to the end of the topic growth.